But
Okay.
isn't it better?
Hey, good morning, world. It's the Peeragogy Project coming at you. We have a new podcast that we're developing to present some of the concepts that we've been researching and talking about for the past 8+ years. Me 8. I'm Charlotte Pierce. I'm the producer of the podcast, and I'm happy to introduce my colleagues most of whom have been involved for the last at least 5 to 8 years. Joe Corneli, wave to the people, Joe.
Everybody.
Sit up a little bit so we can see your beautiful face. Charlie Danoff, he's in Chicago. Hey. And Joe's in London. Paola Ricuarte is in Mexico City. And Lisa McDonald is not on video, but she's back there in LA, right?
Yes.
Awesome. And we have a guest joining us, Pete Forsyth, who will be on our podcast, our actual premiere content episode next week on October 1st, talking about Wikipedia in the misinformation age. So hi, Pete. Thanks for joining us. Joe, why don't you, Lisa, I'm gonna mute you because I think somebody's audio is a little, it's Joe. Joe, you're a little noisy, but that's okay. Why don't you introduce the project a little bit, and I'll just follow along.
Okay, so yeah, for us, we've been doing these kinds of calls often, maybe not weekly, but pretty often for a long time, but we didn't ever do it as a podcast before. So so we're quite familiar with each other. But for anyone who's new to this whole thing and tuning in maybe for the first time to what is peeragogy, we should just say peeragogy is about peer learning and peer production put together. So peer learning could happen in a classroom, amongst students, amongst coworkers in their office, or working from home. Peer production is a little bit different. That's like what happens on sites like Wikipedia, where people come together and typically as volunteers make something together. And so if you put them together, that's what peeragogy is about. And we've been working, one of the things we've been building is a peeragogy handbook, which came out in 2016, the most recent edition. We have another one planned. And that's a high-level overview. Charlie might have more ideas, and everyone else, it's generally a discussion. So that's what peeragogy means to me personally as a high-level overview. So we can.
And I think you and Charlie were pretty much present at the creation, right?
We were,
Yeah, at least I think we just in like 2010, I think, or 2009, Joe came up with Peeragogy, which had the Greek roots for para and production, and then the great Howard Rheingold, who we worked with, he made it more accessible in terms of peeragogy. But I think it's just a term to describe what humans have been doing for a long time that maybe term didn't exist, but like it's also appears where when people were figuring out how to make fire for the first time, they were producing fire, they're learning from one another. So it's just a way to describe what humans have been doing for a very long time. And
we often say that we didn't discover peeragogy. It's just all around us.
Yeah.
And Paola down in Mexico City, she works for, you're going to have to say the name of it in Spanish. I just can't pronounce it.
Tecnológico de Monterrey.
Universidad. Yeah. Okay. So tell us a little bit about how you got into the project and what you are, hoping to get from it.
Well, it was back in 2012. Howard Rheingold invited us to join a class of peer learning. Like, it was a peer learning experience. So I think that at that time was something like very advanced. I mean, people were not thinking about that, like other people in the world, like, and how the digital space transformed the way we interact and we work together and we produce knowledge together. So I think in that sense, Howard was a visionary, and that's how I got in.
Yeah, I think we would love to and plan to, if he agrees, to have Howard to come on and talk about some of his concepts. He was one of the editors of the Whole Earth Catalog, I think, right? Am I right, Joe?
The new Millennium Whole Earth
That's
Catalog or
right.
something like that came out in
Right.
94,
Right.
something like that. So one of the editions of it.
Right. And Lisa, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got involved and where you hope to go with Peeragogy? I'm not going to solo your shots because, well, why not? It's cute. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm from Los Angeles. I got interested in this because I worked for a couple Japanese automakers. So they're both Japanese in origin, both selling cars in the United States. But they were so completely different. I couldn't say one was like this except for nothing was the same at all. Mm-hmm. And I was curious as to why and how they were so different. One was more hierarchical, and the other one was, it almost seemed like chaotic, but it worked extremely well. You couldn't argue with the results. And so I was looking for a way of understanding how this other Japanese company was working, even more so as I saw it evolving into something that I recognized that looked more like the first company. Mm-hmm. Because I think the second company, the pedagogical approach, I found out when I was talking to Howard at an event at UC Irvine, tends to, we don't tend to have a way of understanding it. And so we can evolve our way out of it and the benefits. So I'm trying to understand it better so that people can understand what they're getting out of it, and those uncomfortable points can become made more comfortable and understandable.
So it's just kind of there's not fear, but there's a trepidation of going off onto this collaborative type of operating. Is that right?
Well, we don't have a way of understanding it. So it's very easy to understand like a hierarchical approach, because we grew up in schools with one teacher telling students, you have the pyramids, the org charts, they're very structured.
Sure.
But, pedagogical approaches tend to not be that structured. They tend to be result oriented, focused on a goal. People may switch roles, and it's a lot more fluid. Yeah. And so people like to pretend, for example, when you lay out what are the steps we're going to do to complete a certain process, when you don't know what is necessarily going to be involved, people like and feel good about the pretense of having some control and understanding of what it's going to take to achieve a certain goal. But realistically, in the real world, it's never accurate.
Sure.
So pedagogy allows the fluidity for people and organizations to respond to changing circumstances and knowledge more effectively. Right. But we don't leverage it because we don't have a way of kind of understanding or conceptualizing how it's working. It seems kind of chaotic and random, but it's not. So I'm just trying to understand that a little bit better.
Well, we appreciate what you've brought into the project, and just that, not all of us are from the corporate world, or very few of us, I think. Charlie may be the next most, but it's great to see those applications. And, I am a publisher, or a small publisher of books, and I got into the Peeragogy Project by taking Howard's course, this online course on collaborative, I think it was collaborative learning or something. And met Joe and Charlie and others through that. But I just, now after the 8 years, I've kind of converted my company to, my authors are now collaborators. It takes a little bit of education, like you said, Lisa. It takes a little bit of, they're just not used to working that way. They're used to working with a traditional publisher who gives them money and tells them how it's going to be. But I just find it much more satisfying to work with them. So great. And one thing we've been working on lately, we did a paper for the Futures Journal. And maybe Joe can explain a little bit about something we developed for that, or developed more during that process, the Peeragogy Action Review. Is that an action?
Yeah. Well, I think Charlie and I originally came up with some variant of this in 2012, but yeah, I think it's slowly been percolating. Actually, it originated as the After Action Review, which has been used much more broadly, and we sort of adapted it to be more peer directed and a bit more friendly. But yeah, I wanted to comment about what Lisa was talking about with the Japanese automakers before we get to that, which is there's other interesting methods that originate out of that culture. So there's Scrum, for example, which I've learned about kind of recently, and one could say that Peeragogy is similar to, in some ways, Scrum, but Scrum is related mostly to business and product development. So it's less focused on learning. It isn't to say that we don't have any interest in product development, but we have the learning aspect as well in the mix. So I would just say that in that context, the PAR is a good way to learn what's going on. And someone who had done Scrum might do something very similar. They might do a sprint review at the end of a sprint. So for anyone who's familiar with Scrum, it's not a completely new idea, but basically, yeah, we ask what we set out to do together, and that's also a good thing to do at the start. Like Lisa was saying, well, goals can be kind of fluid, so it doesn't mean you don't want to have them. It just means maybe you want to respect the fact that like you've had one intention and then actually something else happened. So we were working on this paper, as you mentioned, for the Futures Journal, but why were we working on it? Well, we were actually working on it to source content for the Peeragogy Handbook version 4. So in the end, we got a paper instead. So nothing really wrong with that, but things change. So the PAR is a way of kind of building up this record of things that have happened.
Anything to add to that, Charlie? Sorry to.
I think maybe we can drink eat our own cooking, and we can do a PAR perhaps to close out the podcast as like a example of it.
Awesome. That's a great idea. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the topics that we had coming up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm screen sharing it, so if you're on audio, we'll just kind of, these are topics that we want you as our audience to feedback and bring us topics and things you want to talk about in terms of collaboration, peer learning, and peer production, what you're doing out there in the real world. So this is the Peeragogy Podcast. It's introducing the program. Next week, we'll have Wikipedia and the Misinformation Age with Pete Forsyth and Lane Raspberry, who are experts on both Wikipedia and misinformation, and how Wikipedia sort of can transcend some of the distrust around media out there that's biased media or complete misinformation. So that's going to be really fun. It's going to be October 1st, Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to do Peering into Early Learning with the co-laboratory founders, Laura Nignon and Charles Blass, and maybe another guest, but they have a new project that is very much centered around sense making and methods of collaboration. Have I got that right, Joe?
I would say that's a good approximation anyway. Okay. They'll tell us more when they get here.
Right. Yeah. And so, early learning, pedagogy can happen any time of your life. So the pedagogical process is applicable. And we have the handbook. We learned how to publish a book by publishing a book. So that's kind of what we're talking about there. We can talk about Paola's latest paper and project called The Pandemic Condition, which was totally fascinating to me. And I look forward to hearing more about that. It's good for us, for me at least, to stretch my brain by trying to focus or comprehend the concepts that she's bringing up on here, and it's disturbing but necessary, I think, sometimes. we're going to go back and look and call up some of our version 3 contributors for the handbook, version 3, which is the one currently in print. And they're a fascinating group of people, really wonderful folks. Patterns. We're going to have Howard Rangel. We're going to talk about transdisciplinary design, the metacognition group, which is very active study group that we join once in a while, peer-to-peer university, and the project action review, or Peeragogy action review that Charlie was talking about. And we're going to go into here in a few minutes. Lots of good stuff. And we'll put this out at peeragogy.org, so you don't have to remember all this, but those are just some of the things, topics, and we do solicit people for not only for the crew, but for topics and panelists and people that want to talk about their projects. That's it for now.
Cool. Well, that's a good introduction to the podcast. I would say maybe now would be a good time to open the floor. I could just read out these questions here.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yes, please.
Review the intention. So this is the introduction to the PAR by way of example. Review the intention. What do we expect to learn or make together? I guess in that case, it's a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on this first podcast? What have we expected to learn or make today?
I would say we also expected to make a nice introduction to peeragogy for people who haven't heard of it before. And I think with the first part of the conversation, we did that in an accessible way. But if for the viewers out there and the people who are watching this recording or listening to the podcast, please let us know if you have more questions or would like more specifics.
Yeah. So the next question, establish what is happening, what and how are we learning? So this we're just kind of demonstrating that we're focusing on learning. So has anyone learned anything today? I mean, for me, I've learned a little bit about the podcast platform, but has anyone actually learned anything else interesting today?
I've learned to invite people 15 minutes before they actually go live.
There you go.
No.
Another learning point.
Yeah, and it's, I do a lot of podcasts. I've done 85 podcasts for my rowing podcast, Ready Row USA, and I just think bringing people along. I can tell them how I do it, but just the complexity of bringing them along, and I think Lisa referred to this. It's something you need to be constantly mindful of. And it's not just one person saying this is the way it's going to be. So.
Yeah, coming to like a consensus, like Lisa was saying, like with the non-hierarchical way of doing things and like getting things done, be more results oriented. It's a lot harder to measure and a lot messier, as you're saying, and that can be stressful and frustrating for many humans, and understandably so.
So I think we just got a comment saying it'd be great to have some more examples. That's a good seed for this next question. What are some different perspectives on what's happening? So we're getting Jeff signing in saying it'd be great to have some small scale examples. One thing I would say, one perspective that people can be a bit confused when we do examples like this. Like here we're doing an example, but maybe it would be helpful to kind of just tell people about an example. I don't know, Paola, maybe would you like to tell an example? One of the examples I know from your work that you've discussed before was like media production by students, but maybe there's other examples that you can think of that are great examples of peeragogy out in the world.
Well, going back to what do we mean when we say peeragogy, I would just like to say that when we talk about peeragogy, we're just talking about ways of learning together in the digital environment. But of course, peeragogy, as Charlotte said, doesn't only happen in the digital environment. And but it doesn't happen only on digital environment. In reality, we learn a lot. Like we learn always with some others, with people. We don't learn alone by ourselves. And I think that an example, of course, when we teach or when we do things, if we make sense of what we are doing and learning together, that's the plus. And that's why I value most about pedagogy, because we are always doing these exercises of metacognition. What did we learn? Are there ways to learn better? What did in what sense I don't know, we didn't achieve what we were thinking about that we were going to do together. So I think that's the plus. And for example, if you are making a cake and that cake didn't went right, you make sense of what you did together. Like, for example, when I'm cooking with my daughter or with my son, if it didn't go well, then we try to understand what failed, and then next time we can maybe do better. So that's for me
I think what we've done in our group project, or the people have been involved a lot, we also have, gotten to trust each other. So when you say, this didn't go well, it's not a personal insult or attack. It's just, this, and that has been like one of the best things for me, just because, I can be sensitive to that kind of thing. And,
So could I make a quick meta comment? One is that we adapted this format from the U.S. Army's after action review. And at this step, they would say what was right or wrong about what happened. And we're pretty clear that we're not trying to establish what was right or wrong. It's just like we're literally trying to get some different perspectives without forming a consensus about that, or without, it's really quite different. So that's our different perspective. It's not really about
because you aren't going to reach your goal if you don't have people. If you have a flaw sort of festering, you need to bring it out and correct it.
So we're on to item 4 out of 5. What did we learn or change? So what did we learn or change? We kind of went over that a little bit today, but Lisa, would be great to hear from you. Either what you learned or changed, or what you think we should have learned or changed but didn't. Any comments about that?
Well, actually, I'm just learning this new software. It's my first time on StreamYard, and I really like it, actually. It looks like the video is very clear. The audio seems to be coming through really well for everybody. So that's what I'm learning, and I'm glad we made the change. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, Joe, but I certainly do like the platform we're using.
Yeah,
it's a great example.
And I think there's pedagogy that goes on in StreamYard too. The company itself, they have a live town hall on Sunday nights, and they take input, they answer questions. They're very transparent about what they're going to be able to develop for the program, platform. So this is the live streaming platform that we're on. I can see that in just the way, and it's wildly successful because of that, I believe.
That's really cool. So that brings in this industry perspective. I've finished a book about Salesforce did something kind of similar, bringing the conversation with their customers, not really having a marketing department beyond those conversations with customers, at least in the early days of their company. So it's just moving to a different environment brings up some learning for sure. We've done that many times, but please.
Thank you. And then I think the StreamYard, also to Jeff's question, that's like an example of like we're learning it, as Lisa said, how to use it, and like they're listening to those town halls, listening to people, and incorporating into making the future versions of the software better. Software is there's a lot of discrete examples here, like Peeragogy and like Paola brought up the digital space, and this was, even though it was something that was people do outside, but this is very like part of our like value add is that it's like within the digital tools that are available today, how to do it, and like adapting to new tools, and then the friction that can happen with there. So I think that's it's definitely is born in the digital era, and whether or not maybe this like exact conversation we're having right now with video and people in multiple continents and parts of the U.S., it would be very difficult, if not impossible, without these tools. And
I mean, one thing that concerns me is that it does require a pretty sophisticated, high-powered internet connection. Good. So I'm trying to figure out how to get it. And I think the audio will help a lot because we'll be able to go out. We're going to be distributed to all the major podcast apps. So you
subscribe to our podcast.
Yes. The Peeragogy Podcast, for lack of a better, more imaginative title. I think that's it.
We should. So this is good to get on to the next question. What else should we change going forward? So this is the last question. So what did we learn or change? And then what else should we change going forward? And this is a little narrative. This just kind of makes it action oriented as a chance to like reflect on all that stuff and come up with to-do items. So one possible thing would be to figure out how to get, and this would be a big, sort of overhead to set up, but it is possible to set up a call-in bridge so that in principle, we could get audio call-ins from the phone. And that might be not something to expect next week or whenever we do this next, but that it's something that we could bring in additional to StreamYard. I'm sure we could figure out how to do that. So that's an objective.
And I think.
Go ahead, Charlie.
And I think, thank you. And I think also, I think to like Charlotte's point about the quality of the internet and that, I think also something that we try to be mindful of and aren't always, mindful of and not always able to execute on is like making it as accessible as possible what we do, and not having, not paywalls or different types of gaps or like technology gaps to be, and like also like in terms of putting that into practice, like the handbook itself is dedicated to the public domain. So anybody listening who wants to remix that or have it be their own version, they could do that. And so definitely something that we can continue to improve upon.
Thank you so much. Do we have any final comments from Lisa or Paola or Charlie or Joe?
Well, I wanted to go back and say one other thing about 4. I just remembered that we've been live for 26 minutes. So this is short. Our plan was to keep these things to about 30 minutes. And I think that that's a huge change from hour. And it's certainly a change from some of these other online conversations, which can go 3 hours. So I love the quite short and sweet format. And I think what else should we change going forward is, keep that going. But also get some feedback from people about how they like it. Like, do they like a 30-minute session, or would they like it to be in depth? So I think, that's my last comment. There we go.
And I think
it'd be nice to know what people think about it.
Sorry, Joe. Going forward, I'd like to, do a little bit more prep. So now that we've seen this, how this works and how the pacing is, just maybe the PAR, the Project Action Review, is a really good structure. So I think, have a structure for each one. And we will definitely have that next week, Thursday or Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern time with Pete Forsyth and Lane Raspberry about Wikipedia and misinformation and the toxic soup of disinformation and stuff that's going on now. So it's really timely, I think. Any other final thoughts?
Thanks for tuning in, Jeff and Pete, in the comments, and everybody listening. Thank you very much for your attention.
Indeed, and peeragogy.org is kind of the central spot where you can find out all about the project. Thanks to you all. Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Ciao, Lisa.